All right.
All
Here we
right.
go.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to the Phoenixville Library for having us here, and to Mark for coordinating this, handling the technology, doing the recording. I am Carin Bonifacino from Friends of Green Burial, PA, and I'm here with Elaine Brooks, my co-founder, and we're really thrilled to be here to talk to you folks tonight. So a couple things. I have a presentation for you. I'm gonna go through it fairly quickly just because I want to save a nice amount of time for questions. People often have lots of questions about all the different aspects of this. So if you could just save your questions till the presentation is over, people on Zoom and people in the room, that would be great. And yeah, I think without further ado, we will go to the first slide. So just briefly about Friends of Green Burial, PA. We are a grassroots organization in the state of Pennsylvania, and our focus is on education and advocacy. So many people have never even heard of green burial. They don't know what it is. So our first mission is education, and that's obviously what we're doing here tonight. The second aspect of our mission is to create conversation and dialogue around restoring connections between the living and the dead, and that's a conversation for another time, but green burial is one of the ways that the living and the dead get reconnected. And then the final aspect of our mission is securing open space for green burial or natural burial. As you see, we have it stated there, for natural burial and its practices. And what that looks like is reaching out to existing cemeteries to encourage them to set aside space that they are not using and dedicate that to natural burial or green burial. And we are also open to talking with landowners and working with landowners to try to create new cemeteries for green or natural burial. We are chipping away. So if anybody knows of a cemetery that would be a good candidate for this, or knows of somebody who might want to create a new one, we would love to help with that. So that's us, and without further ado, we'll get into the nuts and bolts. So what is green burial? There's a lot of confusion about exactly what it is. These are the basic principles. You're starting with an unembalmed body. So it has not, had its fluids drained and filled with formaldehyde. Unlike cemeteries presently, green burial does not require or want a concrete vault put in the ground. We want the body and the casket to be in contact with the soil. Only a fully biodegradable casket or shroud is allowed, and in this picture actually you can see a really lovely example of a woven casket, and we'll talk a little more at some point about the various options with caskets and shrouds. There's an emphasis on managing the burial ground in a natural state, which means rather than having lawn that is mowed to within an inch of its life, green cemeteries and natural burial grounds are typically maintained as meadows with wildflowers, or if they are forested, then they are, managed for forest diversity. The whole idea is that the cemetery itself is supporting other forms of life. So whether those are birds or butterflies or bees, these bodies are being placed in the ground, but then that space is contributing to the larger ecosystem. And the final piece of green burial is that it encourages family participation to the extent that people would like to participate. So what does that mean? That means they can help to lower the body or the casket into the ground. In some green cemeteries, they're allowed to backfill the grave. And I will talk a little more about the family participation piece further on, but it's something that we are all we have been removed from as a society, and this is restoring a little more of that participation. So how did we get here, and why do we need to go back to the old ways of doing things? Most of you are very familiar, I'm sure, with how we currently bury people in the United States. It's super resource intensive and super expensive. As I mentioned, you've got concrete vaults that cost typically about $1,500. You've got typically steel caskets or hardwood caskets. Often the body is embalmed, so we have not just the chemicals from that body that are being put in the ground. We've got the workers in the funeral homes that are doing the embalming, that are being exposed to those chemicals as well. And then you've got the cemetery itself, which is maintained by lawnmowers and weed whackers and herbicides and pesticides. So modern burial is a catastrophe on every front, and a catastrophe to people's pocketbooks as well. Cremation obviously is better, but we're still not quite there. The crematories use natural gas typically to fire the retorts, and the retorts burn at like 1,600 degrees for 2 or 3 hours to reduce a body to ash. So you've got a tremendous amount of fossil fuels that are being used to cremate bodies, and you've got, you know, pollution going up into the atmosphere regardless of how many mitigation techniques have been put in place to try to capture that. So in the state of Pennsylvania, these are our two options: either burial, what I call modern burial, or cremation. Green burial is our third option. So let's talk about the 3 different kinds of green cemeteries, because there's not just one kind, there's 3 different kinds. The most common kind is what is called a hybrid cemetery. So in that case, you have a modern cemetery that has set aside maybe a 1/4 acre, maybe a 1/2 acre, maybe 2 acres. It varies. And in that dedicated space, they say, over here, we allow for natural burial. So the hybrid cemeteries are the most common kind, especially in the state of Pennsylvania, and we are happy to have hybrid cemeteries. We'll take it. The second kind is a natural burial ground, and that is where it is 100% green burial. And what they do is, across the board, they commit to sustainable practices on the land. So in any aspect of the property, they will not use herbicides or pesticides. They will adhere to management practices that are sustainable and healthy for that ecosystem. So that's a natural burial ground. And then the Cadillac of green cemeteries is a conservation cemetery. These are probably the least common, but they do exist all over the US. These are cemeteries that are created in partnership with a conservation organization. And typically the way it works is the organization will set aside, let's just say, for example, 100 acres. And they will set aside a portion of that property for the natural burial ground. The fees and the money that is brought in through the natural burial, they then use that money to put back into the larger property for management, for restoration. So in this case of the conservation cemetery, you really have, like, you know, a beautiful marriage of land conservation and the bodies returning to the earth in a way that has minimal impact to the land itself. And so you've got protection on 2 fronts, and that money being invested back into the good of the community that land is in. So here's a few pictures. So in North Carolina, Carolina Memorial Sanctuary is a conservation cemetery, and I love to show this picture, first of all, because it's absolutely beautiful with wildflowers and trees. But I also like to show the fact that if you were just dropped down in there, you would never know you were in a cemetery. You would think you were in a nature preserve, and actually you are. It just happens to be a nature preserve that also allows for burials. So this is a beautiful example of a really wonderful way to do this work, and to complete the circle of life in a way that is giving back to the earth and not taking more. Thank you, ma'am. Nature Sanctuary in West Laurel Hill. So this is, I'm guessing this is the closest green cemetery. How far is Upper Darby? Is that not too far away either?
Correct.
It's not too far.
Okay, okay.
It's a bit farther than West Laurel.
A bit farther, okay.
Yeah.
Well, the good news is it's close by. The bad news is it's probably the most expensive green cemetery. It is the most expensive if you want to buy a plot there. Cha-ching! It is not cheap because it is this rather renowned cemetery. Nevertheless, they have set aside about an acre for their green section. And you can see it's got walking paths. This is a picture in, I would say, late spring. The wildflowers have not quite started blooming. It is absolutely gorgeous midsummer through fall. If you ever want to go and just visit, you can do that and go for a walk there. Off to the left, they have beehives there now. And it's just gorgeous. The other thing that I want to point out in this picture is this wall right here. And I'll talk a little bit about headstones, because one of the questions that I often get asked is, do green cemeteries allow markers at the grave sites? And the answer is, it depends. Some do and some don't. What they've done here at West Laurel Hill is they have created this long, low granite wall, and all the bodies that are interred there, the names and the dates of the people are engraved on the wall. So what that does is creates a meadow that is not broken up by lots of headstones. The next picture that I'll show you, thank you, Elaine. Steelmantown Cemetery, which is in New Jersey, is an example of a wooded green cemetery. And they do allow markers. And I think it works at Steelmantown because it is a much bigger cemetery where West Laurel Hills is kind of small by cemetery standards. Steelmantown has acres and acres and acres of woodlands. And the bodies are, just kind of, or the burials are just kind of here and there. And what they have there is a giant pile of flat field stones. And so families, if they so desire, can pick out a stone from the pile and get it engraved or paint it. And so as you're walking through, you occasionally see a marker here and there. And the other thing about this picture and the walking paths is kind of, as I said, many of these cemeteries are open to the public every day of the year, and again, you're combining this idea of being in nature, being outdoors, walking in a beautiful natural area. It doesn't necessarily look like a cemetery. So these are public spaces that people who live in the local community can use, or people who have buried a loved one there can go and take a walk and just spend time in a beautiful place. So Steelmantown is southern New Jersey, not far from like Ocean City and Cape May. It's worth a drive if you ever want to go visit. So, what does it cost? This is a big question, and the answer is it varies widely. Each individual cemetery has different prices for their plots. So, one cemetery might charge $700 for a plot, another might be 1,200 or 2,000. If we're talking about West Laurel Hill, we're talking like 5,000, but that's probably the highest range. And then you've got the other fees that are opening and closing fees that the cemeteries charge. Now, if your family wants to grab their shovels and fill that grave in at the end, I know a lot of these natural burial grounds will lower that price because the family is gonna take care of it. But then there's costs of, are you just wrapped in a couple queen-size cotton sheets as a shroud and placed in the ground? Or do you want to support an artisan who makes beautiful hand-woven willow caskets, which I think is a lovely thing to do, but an added expense. So what I typically tell people is it's probably not going to be as cheap as cremation. Odds are it's not going to be that cheap, but it's also not going to be as expensive as modern burial because you're subtracting costs. You're subtracting the cost of the vault and the cost of the headstone and blah, blah, blah. So you're still looking at probably 4,000 to 6,000, but again, that will even still vary according to how simple you want to go. Oh, and the other cost, of course, is the services of a funeral director. And here's what I'll say about that. In the state of Pennsylvania, it is legal, 100%, to keep your loved one's body at home on dry ice for up to 3 days and then transport the body to the cemetery for the burial. Most people are not going to do that. And so the funeral director would pick up your loved one's body or your body, take it to the funeral home, and just keep it cold. Keep it in the refrigerator until the cemetery is ready for the burial. So there are costs associated with the services of a funeral director or a funeral home. They're gonna file the death certificate. They're gonna do other kinds of paperwork. So again, you know, you have to kind of factor in all those different fees. Yeah. So a few words about the opportunities for participation. As I said, with modern funeral practices, we are all used to being spectators at funerals. We sit in our chairs and sit in our pews, and you know, we are present physically, but most of us do not get to participate with our physical bodies. So as you can see in this picture, these folks are getting ready to lift that body up, and then these boards underneath are gonna be slid out, and they're gonna lower with their own hands that body down into the ground. And that's a good thing, and that's my personal opinion, but it's also, you know, people have looked at when you use your body to participate in these things, you actually start to integrate that grief into your body and not just your head. We do ourselves a disservice by leaving our bodies out of some of these practices. So, not required. No one will ever tell you you have to do these things, but the invitation is there for people to participate. Again, shovels can be nearby for folks who want to even just put a shovel or two of soil into the ground. And the other thing that I've seen people do, which I think is really lovely, is they will often line the bottom of the grave with evergreen boughs or flowers, so that when the body goes down, it's laying on a bed of these beautiful natural materials. And then they'll often do the same after the body's been put in the ground. They'll layer it with evergreen boughs and flowers. And it's just another chance for people to kind of feel like they're doing these final acts of service, which is one way I've heard it called, and I really like that statement. Thank you, ma'am. So this is a really lovely quote that I like to share. Soul and soil are only separated by one letter after all. And I really believe that our body reconnecting with the land is a sort of grounding into the divine, into the lifeblood of the universe, and a beautiful picture of a burial mound with flowers on it.
Go ahead.
And then for the folks who are at home on Zoom, feel free to, I'll leave this slide up for a little while if you want to jot down any of these websites, or if you want to take a picture of the slide with your phone. So obviously a big question that a lot of people have is where can I find this? And Pennsylvania is a big state. Like, we've got 67 counties in Pennsylvania, and right now we've got maybe 12 green cemeteries, which is obviously not a lot for a state this size. But the Green Burial Council has a directory on their website of the entire US and Canada. And so if you have family even in another state and they want to know if there's a green cemetery near them, I highly recommend you go to the Green Burial Council website and you can look up by state where the cemeteries are. They also have a tremendous, they've got videos, they've got articles, tons of resources and materials that you can look for. They also have listings of funeral homes that are what they call green burial certified providers. Those funeral homes are a good place to start. Again, not a ton of them in Pennsylvania. Most funeral homes by now should be up on green burial. But if you call a funeral home and they start telling you, yeah, we do green burial, we take that concrete vault and we turn it upside down, and just say thank you and click and call another one.
They turn it upside down.
So that is something that I've seen on websites of some funeral homes, and I mean, this is greenwashing. They say, like, we offer green services, and then they talk about how they turn the vault upside down so that the casket is in contact with the soil and the box is this way rather than the bottom of the box, and then they put a lid on it. Does that make sense? They just flip it over and they call that their green services with a biodegradable casket. So anyway, Green Burial Council has funeral homes that, have pledged to assist families with this method, and lots of other resources. So the Titan Casket Company is an online company that you can buy caskets of any kind directly from them. It'll be shipped to your home or shipped to a funeral home. Most people do not know that you are under no obligation to buy a casket and earn anything from a funeral home. Again, you can ask them to help with, keeping a body cold and filing death certificates, and you can say, I'm gonna get the casket, I'm good. And you can go to a website like Titan Casket Company, or the next one, which is the Funerary Artisans Collective. And this is a wonderful one, which is a collective of artisans in the United States that have pulled together, created a website, and there's information about how to reach out to each of them to purchase a handmade woven casket from someone in the US. Elaine is a weaver. She's a very talented weaver, and she just attended a session about learning how to weave willow caskets. So those kinds of things are available. And the Funerary Artisans Collective, woven shrouds. And again, you can buy direct from the artist. You don't have to go through a funeral home to get those things. And if you're a do-it-yourself kind of person and you want a casket kit, Casket Builder Supply, all the wood is pre-cut, pre-measured, the holes are drilled. And if your family wants a project, which I think is awesome, you could build your own, or you could have your kids build one for you. Yeah, absolutely, and then you can paint it, and you can decorate it. Good stuff, and again, you're getting your body into the stuff.
But it has to be biodegradable.
And it is, the kits that they sell are
No, I mean
fine.
with paint and so forth.
Oh, good point, no toxic paint.
Right, good point.
Thank you, very good point, very good point. And then Friends of Green Burial, which is our organization, and we have a cemetery directory on our website as well with Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Maryland. Delaware at this point, as far as I know, does not have any green cemeteries yet, but we both live very close to the Delaware state line, so we knock on doors over there from time to time as well. So that is the presentation, and I would love any questions, comments. Yeah?
Yeah, so recently I attended a Zoom meeting on this very same subject.
Okay.
And there were two representatives from the Laurel Hill Cemetery.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So just to update you a little bit.
Yeah.
The one that's a sanctuary, where it's a
Right.
under forest.
Right,
Amazing, but
Yeah.
it's $20,000 to be buried there.
yeah,
And there's only about 30 spaces left. So there's another Laurel.
expanding,
Yeah, there's another Laurel Hill Cemetery.
Yes.
Much bigger,
yeah,
and it's cheaper to get buried there.
okay,
And one of the reasons is because they're not maintaining it as going back to a forest. So they have
Okay.
a big staff at the smaller one that they pay to
Right.
keep the property.
right,
So, and that's pretty wide open as far as there's not many people buried there yet.
right,
So if anybody, and it overlooks I think Kelly Drive or something.
okay.
What's the relative cost of that, do you know, do you remember?
They didn't say, or if they said, I don't remember.
Yeah.
And,
And the other thing that
Yeah.
that I didn't know, in their conversation about this, is that if you have any, like, knee replacements
Mhm.
or tickers in your heart, like, they take everything out. All that comes out.
okay, and not all green cemeteries do that. But I guess they do
They
there.
do that.
Interesting, interesting.
They do that, and then it's an embalming, but it's not with chemicals, it's sort of this natural, whatever.
And
Maybe it's skin goatee or something, I don't know.
So, yeah, thank you. You're bringing up so many good things that I would love to address. And I'll put the embalming piece aside for 1 second. So, yes, Nature Sanctuary, their original green section is just about sold out.
Yes, yes.
And so they are expanding.
Yes.
So if anyone is interested, you can call the funeral home. There's a funeral home that's in that cemetery. And just ask. I'm curious what the plots cost in your new expanded green section.
Right.
I encourage you, call any cemetery. This is what they're in the business to do. They'll tell you their prices. The piece about it going back to forest
Yeah.
is actually one of the things that I love, one of the many things that I love about Nature Sanctuary, and I think it's such a wonderful model. So currently it is a meadow, as you saw in the pictures. But what they are doing is that as the cemetery is filling up, as the plots are filled, they are going back and then planting trees
Yeah.
on those sections, so they the burials are not scattered all over, they're doing it in a very orderly fashion, so then this section is filled, they're planting trees, they move to the next section. This section is filled, they're planting trees, so that ultimately, it will all be forest,
Yeah.
100 years from now. Which I love, and a lot of people say to me, like, how do I become a tree? How do I want to be a tree, which is awesome, and I love it. But what I have to tell people is, like, most cemeteries don't have the space for every single person to be planted with their own personal tree.
Right.
But this is a model where, you know, you might just be feeding the wildflowers for the first 10 years, but then they're gonna come back and plant trees. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, and it's really nice, the wall that you mentioned.
Yeah.
So they said, you know, when you come to visit your loved one, the name will be inscribed on that wall.
Yeah.
Kind of like the memorial wall in Vietnam, only it's
Right.
not so big.
Right,
And so they don't want you walking on the meadow,
Right.
grasses, and
Right.
there's walkways in between, which I found to be a really nice thing.
it's beautifully laid out, it's
Yeah.
beautifully laid
Yeah.
out. So the piece about the embalming
Right.
is that through the Green Burial Council, there are what they call non-toxic embalming chemicals that can be used on the body if the family would like to have a public viewing.
Right.
So I know that the folks at West Laurel Hill, they have shared with me that occasionally they have a family that wants to do a public viewing. They then use these less harmful, non-toxic products, and those allow the body to still be placed in the natural burial section.
Right.
But it's not required, again, if the family is not doing a public viewing, the body can just be kept cold
Yeah.
and then put straight into the ground.
Right.
Yeah.
And they remove all these things like, you know, false knees and jiggers.
Yeah.
You don't have to go to another person like in a hospital or a doctor.
Okay, okay.
They do that service.
Interesting, and that says to me, if they're going through and removing, like, their standards are just that strict.
Right.
And again, you know, like one green cemetery might say, yeah, you can be buried in a pine box, but it can't have any metal screws, right?
Right.
And another green cemetery might say, a pine box is a pine box, we're not worried about the screws. So again, it's worth asking those questions if you're checking into slightly different rules and regulations.
I just wanted to mention
Yeah.
one other thing. I did watch a movie several years ago. It was a documentary about a man who was dying of cancer,
Okay,
and his family did build a box at home.
nice,
And at one point in the movie, he actually got up and he was a musician,
okay.
a lovely man, cello player. He got up on this box and was dancing on the box.
Sure, can I give you a call back? I'm watching a Zoom from the library.
Oh.
Hello, please mute yourself on Zoom.
Yeah, please call back.
Hello, please mute yourself on Zoom.
So
That
the
was-
cello player got
The cello
up.
player got up and he was playing the cello, and then he was dancing a jig. It was
Oh, lovely.
moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question from the chat.
Sure.
This is from Francis. Thank you, Karen. This is so informative and I appreciate your work. I have two questions. One, have you encountered resistance from townships or boroughs, any local lawmaking to keep green cemeteries out? And secondly, how do you answer the question, is there a smell associated with the decomposing body?
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, thank you for the question. I have not been in contact or spoken to any municipalities about green burial. So I have not encountered any resistance. Because there are no laws against this, cemeteries that are currently operating can just designate a space and can start doing green burials. I think if we are ever in a position to create a cemetery from scratch, that might be where we're now approaching a township or a, municipality about zoning, and once they say like, oh, you're gonna bury bodies, then we might encounter some resistance. But honestly, I have gotten tremendous resistance from cemeteries themselves. These folks, at least many of the ones that I have spoken to, cannot wrap their heads around it. And so I just keep, we just keep knocking on doors. The cemetery operators are just so in this mindset that this is how you do things, and despite the fact that I try to enlighten them about the fact that cremation is going to put them all out of business. 25 years from now, I mean, the cremation rate in the US right now is 60%. In some areas, it's as high as 90%. So their clients are all going to be cremated in another 25 years, and I'm trying to educate them about how this is how you stay relevant, and this is how you get some of those people back. Some of those people who are choosing cremation would choose this
Yeah.
if it was available,
Right.
affordable, right? So if you have the opportunity to call your local cemetery, I feel like if more people start asking for it, they may realize
Yeah.
that they're missing the boat. So,
And townships are going to be sensitive to, groundwater and
Right.
impacts of burial and decomposition, so the places that have created sanctuaries like this have gone through that process with, with the township, so it's all part of the creating, a cemetery.
yeah. And the part about the smell, so interestingly, the standard depth of a grave for green or natural burial is about 3.5 feet, which most people are like, oh. The reason the depth is currently at 6 feet is for the vaults, because that's the size of the vaults. So at 3.5 to 4 feet, you have enough soil over that body that it is a smell barrier. Animals are not digging it up. There wouldn't be 300 plus green cemeteries in the US right now if animals were digging up graves. It's not a thing, it's not happening. And the other thing about a more shallow grave is you've got more microbial activity for decomposition. Because what we're trying to encourage here is natural decomposition. So the deeper you go, the less oxygen, the less water. Those of you who are gardeners know all these things. So the smell is a concern that I know some folks have, but there's enough soil to prevent that. All right, I'll take another question in the room. The lady in the back, go ahead.
So I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
So the first question is, how many days after a person passes do you have to do the burial? And then have you had a lot of pushback from the communities where the green cemeteries are because of the potential, and I'm gonna say potential because I don't know
Right.
enough, for contamination, groundwater, et cetera?
So the first part about how long, you can keep a body cold for a really long time. So typically a burial is gonna happen within a week to a week and a half. But with refrigeration, the funeral homes are all equipped, they keep bodies cold until they've got all the paperwork to do the cremation or all the paperwork to do the embalming. So I don't think length of time, typically all of those pieces are gonna come together within a week or a week and a half at the most. But it could be kept cold longer if needed. And the pushback, again, because most of the cemeteries in Pennsylvania right now are set up as, they're already set up as existing cemeteries. I don't think people even really know what's happening in those green burial sections. And if you think about, okay, let's think about how many chemicals we put on our lawns, runoff from roads, herbicides, pesticides. Those things are affecting groundwater probably a heck of a lot more than a body which is composed of we're 60 to 70% water. So that just goes right back into the soil, and then those other components, they decompose and go back in, the earth just, we are nutrients, and the earth recycles those.
So you haven't had much experience with communities realizing that there's a natural cemetery there and then having some sort of a pushback?
Because most of these have not been started from scratch. If a cemetery, you know, if somebody came to me tomorrow and said, I've got 50 acres and I want to create a green cemetery, that landowner and whatever the municipality would have to start the process from scratch, which means there would be probably public hearings and zoning, and so in those cases, there probably would be, and then the process of education. But that really hasn't, we have one cemetery in Pennsylvania, and it's out by Pittsburgh, that was started from scratch. All the others were just existing cemeteries. So because it was already a cemetery, the people who live around there, do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay, good.
yeah. But
Thank you.
absolutely, if one was being started from scratch, it would really depend on how in favor of that project that particular municipality was, you know, to make it a reality. Let me take one from Zoom.
Yep.
We've got plenty of time.
This is from Carin with a K. I'm paying on burial services now. If it's not a green burial cemetery, is it possible to transfer to one?
I would think that she would have to reach out to the cemetery that she's currently, like, if she has a contract or is making a payment plan, she might be able to sell that plot back to them and then find a cemetery that has a green section and then buy a plot there. Yeah. Let me take one from the room. Go ahead.
I've been considering donating my body to science, but then
Yeah.
I heard something on NPR a couple of weeks ago about compost burial. You know what?
I
This sounds similar.
It's similar, so, natural organic, natural organic, NOR, natural
Reduction.
organic recomposition.
Reduction. I think it's reduction.
Thank you, Kyle, thank you, I know, I was like, what is the acronym? Is a fancy way of saying human composting. And it is legal now in, I believe, 5 states, Washington, Oregon, California. The way it works, and this is very, very promising, because obviously, you know, in most of the state of Pennsylvania, we have a lot of land, so something like a green cemetery is a viable option. But in urban areas where land is expensive and not readily available, the natural organic reduction is a process whereby you take a body and you lay it on organic material like wood chips, and you place it in a chamber that accelerates the process of decomposition with, like, you know, air and moisture, and all the conditions are right for that body to decompose incredibly rapidly, like 30 days. And they're able to do many bodies at one time, kind of like cremation. And what the family is then given back, if they want, is soil. So that substrate that the body has been laying on has become soil, the components of the human body have become soil. Those can be planted with a tree, or those can be planted, you know, in a garden. They're like
In your
safe.
favorite spot.
Or in your favorite spot. So not in many states yet, because the whole thing just became legal a few years ago. I think Washington State was the very first one, but it seems to be spreading pretty rapidly, so we can hope that it will be coming to Pennsylvania and that our legislature will, you know, but yeah, that's a really sustainable, like, no negative impact to the earth way of going also.
But it feels similar to what you just talked about.
It is. In green burial, you're placing that body in the earth and it's just happening naturally. Natural organic reduction is just an accelerated process so that, you know, it's available to more people in a shorter period of time.
Thank you for explaining.
Yeah, sure.
One question and one comment.
Yeah.
You mentioned about refrigeration.
Yeah.
We have a very recent, very good history here to fall back on. think of all the people that died through the COVID
Right.
situations, and they were getting refrigerated
Right.
trailers in
Right.
to store the bodies.
Yeah.
And I guarantee they weren't all put in their burial within a week's time.
Correct.
They were long-term. in
Correct,
many cases.
correct. They were holding bodies till all the, yeah,
Now,
Yeah.
the question is this, my wife and I are into a green situation, a green burial situation.
awesome.
And she has passed and is now interred.
Okay.
But what happens is, this particular cemetery, this is Fountain Hill Cemetery.
Fountain Hill
Yeah.
in Bethlehem, uh-huh.
Green Meadows, not
Yep.
Green Acres, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
But at
Yeah.
any rate, they have what they consider, what they call a sequential burial
Right,
arrangement there.
Right.
Where the first person that died is in space number one. If he has a significant other, he or she, that they want to bury, you can buy an adjacent plot.
right,
But as soon as you are done buying the plots, then the second one comes in the next plot, and
Right.
so on and so forth.
Right.
So we do have adjacent plots.
Great.
And I'm sort of wondering, is this a standard procedure, or is that,
I think it's standard procedure in very small green sections.
okay?
Because they only have about a quarter acre, maybe a half an
A little
acre.
bit more than that.
You think
yeah.
it's, okay. But I think it's just because they're, and do they allow markers, or do they not?
They allow, in square inch area, no more than 18 by 18, but it can
Okay.
be a totally random piece of
Okay.
stone. And this is, what I did was get a couple pieces of, actually paving stones,
Nice.
flagstone type.
Yep.
thing. They have to be engravable.
Yeah.
And they have to be less than an inch and a half high.
Okay.
And that's purely for maintenance.
Got it, yep.
And they can't be vertical, they must be horizontal.
Right.
But what the company that I dealt with for the engraving, with my wife's, they finished the engraving, and it's laid in place. With mine, I have everything except the ending date, because I think I'm still here anyway. But
You are very
they-
here.
They will come and engrave it at the cemetery.
Nice.
Just as they would come to, I mean, when
Yeah.
you have a standard tombstone or monument like that.
Right.
They don't take it back to the shop and engrave it. They come in
Exactly.
and do that on site.
Correct.
And so they said, you know, when the time comes that I can have whoever's handling my affairs
Yeah,
get in touch with them, and they will come to the site
Yeah.
and engrave it there at the site.
perfect,
So,
perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah, the sequential burial is not at all of these, but like I said, I think the smaller ones,
yeah.
it just, because they don't have 5 acres.
Right,
And
right.
somebody's, well, I wanna be buried over there and I wanna be,
Mhm.
it just is a simpler way of
Yeah.
doing it. You don't get to pick your plot, you're just gonna go in whichever one is the next one that's available.
But the reason I asked that mainly
Yeah.
was because earlier you had said about graves scattered here and there.
In the
And
bigger
that's-
cemeteries, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I
Yeah.
was asking that.
Yeah, very
But
good.
now, this goes back about I would say about 15 years ago that we bought the plots,
Okay,
okay? And at that time, there were only 3 in
Okay.
the eastern part of the state.
right,
And that was at Laurel Hill, West
Right.
Laurel Hill.
right.
And that was at Yaden, which you said about Upper Darby, I don't know. if
Upper
that's-
Darby is a Quaker cemetery.
Okay,
Southwestern Friends.
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
But in Yaden, there's one, and then in Fountain Hill, the
yeah,
Fountain Hill Cemetery.
yeah.
And that's-
We're
that's a
getting
hybrid.
more, we're getting more.
Yeah.
They're popping up, they're coming.
2
Yes.
more questions on chat here.
Sure.
Eva asks, are the majority of funeral directors encouraging of green burials?
I don't know if they're encouraging. I think some of them are concerned because, you know, if people are buying a $300 shroud and they're being wrapped in that and put in the ground and they're not buying a $3,000 casket from them, it is cutting into their profit margin. But there are some funeral directors who are actually excited about this. They do exist and they do see that this is the future and they wanna be helping families. So that's where I'm saying, like, you know, God forbid if you need a funeral director on short notice for something like this, just be aware that you might have to make a couple phone calls, but there are plenty of funeral directors who know what this is about and they're excited to work with families for this.
Okay, thank you. And then Kate asked, does your website provide the practical steps / considerations at the time of the person's death so people can prepare? I assume there are a number of FYI pieces that would be helpful to know in advance.
So the website itself doesn't necessarily have I guess what I would say is this whole process unfolds essentially the same way any death and any burial would unfold. Meaning, if someone wants to be buried, the first thing you do is buy a plot. Whether that's you're buying a plot years before you die or someone dies suddenly and you start calling cemeteries. So the first thing you do is buy a plot. The second thing you do is find a funeral director to work with, and then everything unfolds. Really, the only thing that's different is just that final piece that the body is going to. So I hope that helps, Kate. Yeah, I would maybe just look up like funeral planning in general maybe and see. We'll have to think about that. Okay. I'm sorry, can I take this gentleman?
Yeah.
He's been waiting.
Yeah, usually, I've read that if you get composted,
Yeah,
you become complete compost in 30 days.
I think that's the time frame for what's called natural organic reduction.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, how can your bones get, reduced in that amount of time? Is it the addition of like millions of worms that they put in?
I don't know if you Google
Right.
natural organic reduction,
Okay.
then it will describe the process. And yeah, they're adding things to that to really accelerate it. And maybe some of the larger bones aren't completely decomposed. I don't
Okay.
know if they pulverize those, but it's impressive how quickly they get a body to break down.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. Ladies in the back.
You go ahead, Sharon.
You go
Sorry.
first.
Oh, okay. I just want to confirm that you can get, I mean, it's sort of like it defeats the purpose of being all natural, but you can get cremated and then bury your ashes in a green cemetery. Right.
I think some don't allow it. Again,
Oh, really?
some are stricter than others.
Mm-hmm.
I think most of them do.
Okay, because I know Laurel Hill does,
Okay.
and I thought Fountain Hill does too, because that is like a section for scattering.
It's
It's,
right.
but that is a thing, right?
It is absolutely a thing, right. In
Okay.
a biodegradable urn,
Right, okay.
the ashes can be interred in a lot of green cemeteries, absolutely.
So are there cultures that have never embraced the whole embalming thing? And
Yeah.
within the US, I'm thinking Amish, possibly Quaker.
Muslim.
But other countries that have never gotten into this, India, where they
Yeah.
burn the bodies.
Yeah.
um,
Absolutely, and it's funny that you say Amish, they embalm. They absolutely embalm, which I found really surprising.
Yeah.
The two main cultures in the US are Jews and Muslims. There was a piece in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and it was heartbreaking recently. There was a young 14-year-old who was killed at Roxborough High School after the football game. And a friend of mine sent me a photo piece from the Philadelphia Inquirer of his burial. I was unaware that he was Muslim, and they must have gotten permission from the family. It was like a journalistic photo piece of his casket being carried out of the mosque, and this was at the Quaker Cemetery in Upper Darby. I think it's called Friends Southwestern Friends. They opened the casket, they lifted him up, he was shrouded out of the box. he was handed to the people waiting in the grave, and they laid him down. It was a stunning piece. It was heartbreaking. But they bury very quickly and 100% natural. They've never done embalming, never done vaults, and neither have Jews. Other countries, absolutely.
Reform Jews.
Plenty of them have not, you know, I mean, I think India is, a lot of cremation, a lot of pyres. I'm not as up on, I know in the UK is where the natural burial movement began. And as tiny a country as Great Britain is, they have hundreds of green cemeteries over there versus the US, which is massive by comparison, and we have hundreds. Like, we should have thousands. It's very popular in Great Britain, yeah. Yes, yes.
So, maybe a dumb question, but do you have to be buried in a cemetery? If you want to be buried, do you have to be buried in a cemetery?
I mean, in Pennsylvania, again, because it varies from state to state, I mean, if you have land, or is that what you're asking?
Right.
Like, yeah, I don't know, it probably varies from county to county or from township to township. There is a process that you can go through to create a family cemetery on your land. I have heard of people doing that. I'm not familiar with the process myself. But it is legal in Pennsylvania to have a family burial plot on your land, so. Yeah, a cool thing if you know that, I think where it gets tricky is if the land is not kept in the family and now you've got an outside buyer coming in and they're like, oh, by the way, I'd like to come visit grandma every, Mother's Day, and like, how do you work out?
There's Skippy and there's Uncle Bob,
Right,
right? Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's legal and people do it, absolutely.
Got it.
Absolutely. And we are just about coming up on time. Are there any more Zoom questions?
No more Zoom questions, no.
Go ahead.
The one thing that people forget or
Yeah.
don't realize either way is, first of all, a lot of indigenous cultures worked with natural burial because that's all they had.
That's all there was.
Secondly, a lot of the people that emigrated to this country, because I know this happened in my own family back in the 1700s, before this was a country.
Right.
These people didn't have embalming, they didn't have situations, and
Right.
bless you.
Thank you.
And it was either in a pine box or just in a hole in the ground.
This
So it-
is what burial was
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
tens of thousands of years.
Yeah.
Right. It's
And-
only in the last 100 years that we've turned it into this.
And
Yeah.
you were talking about burial on your own land.
Yeah.
Okay, the one side of my family, they came in the mid-1700s
Okay.
to the country, and they settled in the Lehigh Valley. And
Okay.
the land that they settled on is now part of a huge prestigious golf course.
Okay.
Now, what happens is, off the one green, there's a family cemetery with the tombstones still there.
Interesting. Yeah.
In the golf course.
Yeah.
So, there's Uncle George out there, but this is actually part of the golf.
And it's interesting because we investigated dozens
Oh my
of
God.
cemeteries in Chester County, and you'd be surprised like how many random places, like the back of a shopping center, and then there's like a
Yeah.
little fence and there's an old family cemetery there. And they're tucked away all over the place.
And
yeah.
one thing in this area too is Revolutionary Cemetery.
Sure, yeah.
There's 3 of them within just a couple miles of the library.
Yeah, very cool.
Is it a
Just
one or
have
two shot
one question.
Sure.
It's not a question, but a
One or
thought
two
about
shot penalty for
if
that.
the funeral parlor holds the body.
Yeah.
for-
Oh, I
imagine that's pretty
think
expensive.
I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a mulligan, I don't know.
I actually don't think it's that bad.
No, okay.
Yeah, again, you you would maybe wanna, if you have the luxury of time, call a few funeral homes and say, you know, what would be the fee to keep a body cold
Yeah.
for a week?
Right.
I don't think it's, what do I know?
No.
I wanna believe that that's not
Too much.
gonna be a huge expense.
Yeah.
They're gonna charge you something for, but they essentially don't have to do anything. It's,
Mm.
sorry to say it this way, but it's like storage, you know?
Yeah,
So,
okay,
yeah.
yeah.
Have you ever seen a body on dry ice? Have you ever seen one?
I have.
I have assisted families before the person has died to get all the pieces in place, but I have not been present once the body had died and was on dry ice. Yeah. Sure.
This is something I was watching today and I heard about, we got this in the mail, your presentation.
Okay.
And I remember there was a movie back in 1973
Okay.
called Solving Grain, Soya Grain.
Oh, yeah.
1973, right?
Yes.
And that was, Charles Heston was in that movie.
Right.
I don't know if here I've seen it or not, but what it got was the government, there was overpopulation problem. Which
Okay.
we're talking, we hear about that too.
Right.
But the government, they would take the people that were ready, they advertise and everything, you know, dying and how they wanted to go out.
Okay.
And they would set up, when it's time to come, they would go get these people, they're still alive, and take them to an area, to his hospital, or wherever it was, some kind of building, and they had a big screen, and you would see the sunset or sunrise, or the creek, or the forest, wherever.
Okay.
And then that person died, they helped. Hey, death sped up, in other words,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
But the whole thing was about them turning the bodies into wafers.
Okay.
That for the people to have as food.
Soylent Green people.
See that, that was pretty much. 1973. Jonathan Heston. James Cameron.
Well, we're talking about bodies feeding flowers and feeding trees, right? So, I don't know about feeding people.
Yeah, I was just saying, that's how wild this thing was.
Yeah,
Back
yeah.
then, 73, right?
Yeah.
But it just sounded, just come along, I heard about that.
Yeah, yeah. No, we are not doing that, we are not doing that. And listen, I want to be mindful of everybody's time, we've gone over a little bit.
Thank you so much, Carin.
Everybody on Zoom. Thank